Did you know that 33 million teen vapers globally think that because e-cigarettes don't cause cancer, like conventional cigarettes, they must be all good? By conveying the hazards of nicotine vaping as 5-minute short stories or microlearning, and spoken in the simplest language possible, Safeguard is by youth, for youth, and in the language of youth. Teen Vaping Awareness Mission. So, what are you waiting for? Listen, learn, quit.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Safeguard, the teen vaping awareness micro-learning platform where I seek to take the complex science of adolescent vaping and simplify it down to a teen-appropriate level. So today focuses on the G of Safeguard, standing for Global and US Teen Vaping Epidemiology. We'll discuss tobacco surveys amongst youth in different countries across the world, including the US Annual National Youth Tobacco Survey, NYTS, and we'll zoom into what the NYTS tells us about the numbers of teen vapers and trends that we've seen in the last few years, and focusing on those numbers in 2024 as well, as that's the most recent data we have from NYTS. So now, just to recap what we know so far over the course of these first 4 stories, as now we're reaching the halfway point of the Safeguard series. Story 1 focused on the history of smoking and the invention of the e-cigarette by Chinese pharmacist Han Lick. Story 2 delved much deeper into the differences between smoking and vaping and why teens think vaping is safer. Story 3 was that deep organ-by-organ analysis of the medical hazards of using e-cigarettes. And Story 4 delved deeper into the corporate tactics that corporations use to lure minors to using these vape devices. So Story 5 now is going to focus on the math of vaping. How many minors are vaping annually, US and globally, how it's measured, and what some of the trends are and what they signify. So that's going to be our real focus in Story 5. So I told you guys before that we were focused on global and US teen vaping epidemiology. What does epidemiology mean? It's the study of how often a disease or disorder occurs in a certain population, a certain group of people. It focuses on the following 4 metrics: demographics, the groups of people that are affected; the incidence, the number of people newly affected each year; the prevalence, the total number of people affected at any given time; and the mortality, the number of people who die of the ailment each year. But how do we even get this data? How do we even measure things like incidence and prevalence? Someone's got to count. And that's why we have these global level surveys to study teen vaping epidemiology. So here you can see some surveys. We'll get into US surveys a little bit later in this video, but here you can see some examples of global surveys that focus on teen vaping epi. And you can see some examples here. And for example, there's the China National Youth Tobacco Survey, which is a yearly survey, but isn't always released publicly, so you don't have access to some of that data. There's also ones in Canada and Italy that are done every 4 years, which is effective, but not necessarily as fresh or up to date as some of the other global level surveys that we have here. And then you can see many of these countries, South Korea, South Africa, England, Canada, etc., that have surveys that are done annually, and some of them, especially in England, France, and Italy, feed into larger WHO data sets surrounding teen vaping. So now understanding what the prevalence is and how these teen vaping rates stack up on a global scale. So here you can see some data surrounding teen vaping. You can see that Monaco has the highest percentage, followed by Guam, followed by Poland, Lithuania, Italy, all the way going down. And here are some trends that I wanted to talk about here. So first and foremost, some of the countries that I just listed that have the greatest e-cigarette usage rates are often European countries, Monaco, Poland, and Italy being good examples of this. And the reason why this is because in these countries, smoking is synonymous with the culture there. It's popular culture there. Everyone does it, which is why a lot of teens might be accustomed to people that they see in their communities and even members of their own family using these cigarettes. And hence, for these teens, maybe vaping is even considered a safer alternative to what their family or their community has done in the past. And that's why this culture of cigarette usage is truly prominent in these areas, which then sort of translates itself to e-cigarette usage. And this is sort of what drives those numbers up in a lot of those European countries. The other thing I wanted to note here is you might look at yourself and say why USA and China, for example, have so much lower rates of e-cigarette usage. And the reason why that is not because less people are actually vaping in these countries. It's more so because of the population. See, if you think about a country like Monaco, which only has 40,000 inhabitants, a country like the USA or China, which has 330 or so million and over a billion inhabitants respectively, end up being like these percentages end up translating to way more actual people than 41% of the population of a country like Monaco. And that's why it's important to understand not just the percentages here, but to understand the actual population and how those two work together in order to have a full 360-degree view of how these vaping rates actually stack up globally. So moving into some notable US-based surveys that are used to study teen vaping epidemiology. So here you can see some examples. The one we're going to focus on primarily is the National Youth Tobacco Survey, or the NYTS. This is a dedicated tobacco use survey that's conducted online. It's a web-based survey, and it is a survey that has been in existence and used by the CDC since 2011. And it encompasses all grades from 6th through 12th grade, and it's an annual survey. So this is going to be the focus of the rest of the series, and the rest of this video, and we're going to be focused on analyzing the data here and trying to understand how the NYTS works in the next couple of slides. But there are many other US-based surveys as well that are in existence to amplify and corroborate the data from NYTS. You can see some of them are pen and paper surveys like the MTF survey. Some of them are web-based like the International Tobacco Control and Policy Survey. And some of them are even telephonic like the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, or BRFSIS. So now moving into NYTS more specifically. So it's, as I was saying, it's an annual survey. And by sending e-questionnaires to millions of students, they hope to get at least 30,000 responses in roughly 250 to 300 middle and upper schools every single year. But may I put on my own epidemiologist hat and say something contentious for a second? While the CDC has, of course, super strong epidemiologists and biostatisticians, I'm left wondering whether or not this sample size here of only 0.1% of the larger population of almost 28 million middle and upper schoolers is a representative sample size. And that's something that I'm wondering if this small subset of the population is necessarily representative of all the complex factors that are at play in the larger population of 27.7 million 6th through 12th graders nationally. So that's something that I'll note, but we digress. And now looking at this graph, the first thing we need to do if we're trying to understand e-cigarette usage in the US is to break it up into pre-2019 and post-2019 data. So pre-2019, you can see the data here, and post-2019 will be the focus of the next slide. Here you can see how tobacco, or rather e-cigarette usage, has dramatically increased overall over the course of the years between 2011 and 2019, dramatically from around 2 or 3% all the way up to around 28%, which is an astronomical jump. And this is probably the case just due to the popularity of these e-cigarettes becoming much more ubiquitous across the country over the course of those 8 years. But now, pivoting to what's gone on post-2019. So here you can see the data all the way through the NYTS, all the way through 2024, which is the most recent data that we have. And to give you a snapshot of the 2024 data, it consisted of 29,861 students, so about the 30,000. And the results, when we sought to extrapolate that number to the larger population of middle and upper schoolers in the US, it estimated that around 1.63 million of them vape, 410,000 being middle schoolers, and the remaining 1.21 million being high schoolers. 26.3% reported vaping daily, and 38.4% used an e-cigarette at least 20 of the last 30 days. And you can see here, in terms of the trend over time of this data, that Over the course of 2020 and 2021, the e-cigarette usage rate monumentally dropped. It more than halved in the years 2020 and 2021. And this was likely due to the COVID pandemic preventing teens from being able to clandestinely, secretly procure their vape devices, which might explain the modest uptick in e-cigarette usage rate in 2022. But when we think of what's gone on in 2023 and 2024, this is really what gives us a lot of hope for the future, that these numbers have continued to decrease. And this might be because some of the people who stopped vaping in 2020 and 2021 continued and did not return to vaping in 2023, 2024. And this gives us hope for the future that this number will continue to decrease. Also, the more strict enforcement of many vaping-related policies has led to this number to decrease in the past 2 years. So finally, I ask, how can we ascertain that the recent dip in US teen vaping rates is actually correct? First and foremost, we need to ensure that the sample size is representative, forcing us to ask the question of whether or not the 0.1% of students that surveyed is enough statistically. We then need to think about the sample location, going beyond just the sample size, understanding or requesting the NYTS survey for the names of the 283 schools that it surveyed, and understanding the percent breakdown of urban, suburban, and rural schools chosen, and making sure that's also representative of the larger population to ensure the findings are extrapolatable. And lastly, we need to think about whether or not the NYTS is corroborated or whether or not its results are confirmed by other surveys. We need to ensure that this decline is consistent with 2023, 2024 data from other surveys that I was discussing before in order to ensure the accuracy of the NYTS dip in US teen vaping over the last couple of years. So thus concludes story 5, and here begins our learning objectives quiz. So here are the 5 questions here. Epidemiology, what is it the study of? What's better to study teen vaping, incidence or prevalence, and why? What's a big reason for teen vaping to be high in Eastern Europe? Which of these is or are true about the NYTS with multiple possible answers? And what are some caveats of the NYTS with multiple possible answers? As usual, I'll give you the classic 20 to 30 seconds to pause the video and attempt some of these questions, and then we will check back in for the answers. Okay, I hope you've been able to attack all of these questions and be able to think about them and record your answers. Now we'll look at the answer key. So here's the answer key for the questions. So you can take a second to check the answers that you wrote down or recorded. And as usual, if you've got 3 out of the 5 questions right, thank you so much for listening to me, and let's move on to story 6.